Hey guys, my name is Bando, this is Brexit Bando. Today I'm going to be tackling the topic of canon. For those of you that don't know, canon refers to a existing storyline with a set of rules that is the law of the law. The fluff is generally what we call it in 40k, and the reason I'm making this video is because there's a lot of discussion going around, including a lot of discussion from authors of 40k books themselves, talking about how 40k doesn't have canon. Canon doesn't fit. There is no canon in the Warhammer novel series. Now, I'm sure you're also wondering why there's a picture of a woman with a lightsaber on the screen as well, because I'm going to tackle canon by talking about one of the most important and problematic canon things. I'm going to start with the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Now, in 1977, Wayback Machine Go, George Lucas releases Star Wars, and we get a titanic shift in pop culture. The world exists. If you ever want to create a new calendar and get rid of AD and BC and AD, you should have before Star Wars and after Star Wars as your date calendar. Because 1977, Star Wars changed everything. The quality, the writing, the background, the world building, it was a cultural phenomenon. And one of the first few lines in that film is C-3PO saying how they're going to send us to the spice mines of Kessel. We didn't find out what the spice mines of Kessel were for nearly 30 years. It was never touched upon again in the 3 original films. It wasn't touched on in film until Solo was released in the 2000s. And generally it wasn't touched upon in depth until Kevin J. Anderson's novel or Jedi Academy trilogy. But kids and adults had the same reaction. What's the spice mines of Kessel? He's terrified of it. He doesn't want to be there. It's clear that the Imperials control it. It must be a bad place. Now, what happens if, in the next Star Wars film, we go to the spice mines of Kessel, and it's a giant inflatable playground where everyone gets ice cream and sweets, and the droids get all the oil baths, and they get all polished up and look all shiny, and everyone has fun. Well then, why was he so terrified of it? Why would anyone be afraid of going to the spice mines of Kessel? So, in 77 we have the release of Star Wars, then a few years later, I believe in 83, we have Empire Strikes Back, and our story expands. Suddenly, the Obi-Wan Kenobi saying, yeah, I knew your father, he was the best pilot I've ever met. We know this, we see it at the end of the film, he's a damn good pilot. But we don't know it's his father. Oh, spoiler alert for a 50-something-year-old movie. So, he was killed by Darth Vader, a young Jedi who I trained. So we get the most critically important moment in cinematic history. The duel on Bespin, which cinematography-wise is, I think, one of the greatest scenes in all of cinema. The lighting, everything perfect. We get that reveal, the greatest reveal we've ever had in a movie. And it's a plot twist that, unless you're Dutch, you just didn't see coming. And that's important. Oh my god, what's happened? We found out that Darth Vader is actually Luke's father. And then in a few years later, we get the 3rd film. And then we basically got nothing, more or less. It's not technically true. We did actually get 2 more Star Wars films, which a lot of people don't know about. You have the Ewoks Battle of Endor and the Ewoks Caravan of Courage, which I think are fantastic movies, but some people think are total trash. But if you like 1980s fantasy movies, the Ewoks Caravan of Courage and then the Ewoks Battle of Endor are hilarious, and they're great. But then something happened in May of 1991. May 1991, Bantam Books releases or publishes Timothy Zahn's The Heir to the Empire. It was the first official novel in the Star Wars expanded universe. What did that mean? That wasn't really a thing, what's an expanded universe? I mean, it wasn't called the expanded universe at the time. And we'd had Star Wars novels beforehand. We'd had a couple of comic books, we'd had a couple of young adult novels. These weren't official, though. They were all kind of this grey market area, cashing in on Star Wars. But this was official. And that meant something, because it meant George Lucas had signed off on this. He'd read the story and said, yeah, that fits. So we've got Heir to the Empire. And Heir to the Empire, written by Timothy Zahn, was, and still is, quite possibly one of the best Star Wars novels out there. In fact, it was not just a single novel, it was an entire trilogy of novels. Let me just quickly get... that'll do. There we go. So we have Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and then The Last Command. Timothy Zahn created what was for a long time the prequel trilogy. This was the next Star Wars story for most of us. You had a new enemy. The Empire is falling. It hasn't fallen. This is something the expanded universe did so much better than Disney. You cut the head off the snake and it didn't die. It kept surviving. It was a galaxy-spanning empire. And it still held Coruscant. In fact, this is actually the first mention of Coruscant is in these books. Coruscant is still held by the Empire. Actually, no, I think at this point it might not be. The New Republic's there. The Republic has been rebuilt. And a new enemy has appeared. The New Republic has managed to hunt down all of the Empire's Grand Admirals. We don't know what a Grand Admiral is, but we are given the implication that a Grand Admiral is a terrifying tactical genius. All of them were, and there have been several, and each one was a struggle to get rid of. But a new one has appeared, and the thing that makes this one so dangerous is he was an alien, and the Imperials don't like aliens. So what's a non-human managed to do to get himself to effectively the highest rank in the Imperial military? That tells us something, that we should be afraid of this character. And his actions match that. His actions show that he is smart, that he is capable, and that he is not just a moustache-twirling villain, that I'm evil and I'm winning because the plot requires me to do so. He has a Jedi Master working for him who has gone a bit doolappy, Joruus C'baoth, who is on the front cover of Heir to the Empire. And it becomes clear that, again, spoiler alert for a 30-year-old book series, Joruus C'baoth is a clone. This is, again, before the prequel trilogy came out, so the Clone Wars was still something we knew very little about. In fact, all we knew about the Clone Wars at this point was the name The Clone Wars. So it is written that the cloners were actually the bad guys in this. That they were the ones to invade and the Republic was the ones that fought them back. It doesn't cover much of it. It's very few bits, but... So, Joruus C'baoth is a Jedi who wants to get back and he wants to have his revenge, so he works alongside Thrawn. Thrawn, being smart, has already found a way to neutralise this Jedi, some animals that nullify the Force. Why do we need to do that? Well, we already have an established rule. Jedi, and all Force users by an extent, are incredibly dangerous. And Joruus C'baoth is shown to be incredibly dangerous. So, the canon that we have established is respected, because Thrawn doesn't just go like, oh, I'm immune to the Force, because the plot requires it. It is expanded. We have the introduction of, I'm going to butcher the name because I've never heard it pronounced, but it's spelt like Yissalarami. Come from a world where the biggest predator on the planet hunts using the Force. So it makes a bubble of no Force, so it hides. And he keeps one around him because he's smart. Han, Luke and Leia are back, doing their thing. I think they have kids at this point. I can't quite remember. It's been a while since I've read them, but I'm going to reread them again after this. Through these 3 books, at no point are the original 3 films disrespected. At no point is anything that happens in the original 3 films undone or made to be wrong, to have to be ignored. Okay? And that means that this story can fit nicely alongside those films. This then led on to... Let me just find it. Where was it? 381 books in total. That is not including comic books, short stories, collected stories, secret history, or video games. 381 books that continued the story from those first 3 movies. You have books that take place the day after the Battle of Endor. You have books that take place between books. You have books that took place before films. And it covered everything. Some of these books were by an author called Michael Stackpole. Now, Michael Stackpole you may recognise if you're a Battletech fan, because he writes a lot of Battletech books. And he wrote the X-Wing series. These books, starting with Rogue Squadron, which shows Wedge Antilles reforming Rogue Squadron. Basically, the New Republic's decided, you killed 2 Death Stars, we need this squadron back, we need you to be a symbol of unification. So Rogue Squadron is brought back, and they go off and do their thing. Wedge's gamble, Rogue Squadron is given the task of cracking Coruscant, so they have to switch from being fighter pilots to infiltrating the capital and helping take a planet. The Krytos trap, the Imperials, well, they didn't like the idea of losing the capital, so they poisoned the planet. And now they're having to deal with a plague that threatens the galaxy and the Empire. The Bacta War, which was the first Star Wars book I ever owned, and actually I'm currently re-listening to the audiobook. That plague can be cured by Bacta, so the Empire have taken the only planet that can cure Bacta. These books were my childhood. I was bullied a lot at school, obviously, you know, fat, autistic, and like Star Wars, of course I was going to get bullied. These books basically were my friends. These characters were like my friends. If I was feeling miserable, I dove into these books because I could live vicariously through these people, or these characters. I still remember sitting on a coach going on a school trip, reading Iron Fist, and a certain character dying, and I started crying. I'd never cried reading a book before in my life, but it had felt like I'd lost a real-life friend. Which my English teacher who was supervising us thought was hilarious, but also explained is the power of reading and books. These books, all 10 of them, share rules, they share a setting, and something that happens in one of them is referenced in others and has an effect in others. Now, I know that in these books, TIE fighters, for example, have no shields and have no hyperdrive. So, at no point does a standard TIE fighter suddenly have shields or a hyperdrive. It's a rule of the setting. Then, in the early 2000s, after Disney acquired Star Wars, they got rid of this expanded universe. They said, you know what, this is no longer canon, and it's all gone. 381 books were suddenly, they were worthless, effectively. They were, thanks for playing, thanks for spending an absolute fortune. Remember, these books are about $5.99 each. I'm not very good at maths, but $5.99 times 381 is a whole lot of diddly. And they announced they were going to do their own thing. And they released the Aftermath trilogy by Chuck Wendig. So I pre-ordered Star Wars Aftermath. I got, I love Star Wars books. I love Star Wars. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I had it pre-ordered at my local bookshop. I left work. I ran to the train station to get back early, to get to the bookshop, to go and get... Yeah, I ordered it to a bookshop rather than ordering it on Amazon because, YOLO. And I grabbed this book and I devoured it. I finished that book probably... I don't know. It may take 2-3 days. This book is its own story. It's got its own rules. It references its own things. Obviously, it's got the prequels in there now, and it sets up the sequel films. It also mentions things that we know are going to happen in the sequel films. And at one point, the main character is sneaking around an Imperial base, and who do they run into? Wedge Antilles. They run into Wedge Antilles, and I'm like, hey, that's my friend. I know Wedge. I know what Wedge is capable of. I know who Wedge is. I know the kind of person he is. I know his foibles. I know what ticks him off. I know what he likes. Not this Wedge Antilles, I didn't. This Wedge Antilles was a completely different person. This Wedge Antilles was... It was something wearing my friend's face, is the best way of describing it. Star Wars Aftermath by Chuck Wendig is not the worst Star Wars book I've read. Star Wars Aftermath by Chuck Wendig is the worst book I've ever read. And I legitimately kept it by the toilet during COVID in case I ran out of toilet paper, because I would have legitimately wiped my arse with the pages of this book if I'd needed to. I also told Chuck Wendig this, and that's why I'm banned by him on Twitter, so, I never bought Aftermath, Life Debt, or Empire's End. I did, however, buy some other of the new Star Wars books, and I bought some of the Claudia Gray books. I can't remember what their names were. Lost Stars, I think. Yeah, Lost Stars and Bloodline, I think it was. Lost Stars, which is a young adult novel, was quite good because it's two kids who grow up together. They join the Empire, but one of them leaves and joins the rebellion. And actually, a lot of it kind of fit into where the old expanded universe, because it was all taking place at the same time as the original films. They were all off-screen from the original films. For example, in A New Hope, when the gunner on the Star Destroyer is about to shoot 3PO's escape pod, the other character is just off-screen manning one of those guns. That's the sort of thing. And it was pretty good, even though it was a young adult's novel. And then there was Bloodlines, I think, which was another Claudia Gray book, which, again, didn't respect, or wasn't in canon, it was its own thing, and it had the whole galaxy finding out about Darth Vader being Leia's father. Okay, not as good as Lost Stars. I have zero interest in buying The Legend of Luke Skywalker, Star Wars Last Shot, any of the Aftermath trilogy, Smuggler's Run, a Han Solo and Chewbacca adventure by Greg Rucka, Moving Target, a Princess Leia adventure by Cecil Castellucci, Weapon of the Jedi, a Luke Skywalker event, etc., etc. None of these books interest me now. None of them, because they are not a story that I'm aware of. They don't respect the original canon that I have read. How does this relate to Warhammer? This is obviously a Warhammer channel, right? We do Warhammer stuff here. Well, back in like 2012, we had the release of Horus Rising. We knew about the Heresy. We'd had some Heresy art books before. We had 3 Heresy, Visions of Heresy books, which had some fantastic artwork and started giving us some short stories into the Heresy. We had Index Astartes drop, which gave us our first like official canon view of the Legion Astartes before the Heresy. We found out that the Word Bearers wore grey. We found out that the Alpha Legion wore sort of violet blue. We found out that the Word Bearers wore white and blue, something that we didn't know before. Wow, that's amazing. All of these things. And then Abnett drops Horus Rising. And Abnett at this time is still riding on the high of his Gaunt's Ghost fame because, you know, Dan Abnett's Dan fucking Abnett at this point. And we devour this book. And it's great. Horus Rising's a phenomenal story. Now, Horus Rising, if you read it nowadays, doesn't fit in with the Heresy. It doesn't have the same language. Paragon blades, charnable weapons, certain armours, bolters, chainsword, heavy weapons, terminators. It's not Heresy. It's very much, this is 40k, but in the setting of 30k. Doesn't matter. Because this was the starting point. Then, we got False Gods. Fantastic. Graham McNeil comes in, knocks it out the park with a sequel, and does a really good job of expanding on what Dan Abnett gave us to begin with. The characters are the same. Horus Lupercal is the same. Ezekiel Abaddon, or Abaddon, is the same character. You know, Horus Axeman, Tarek Torgadon, they act the same, their motivations are the same. Garviel Loken is the same person. He cares about the same thing, the same people. And then Galaxy in Flames. It all comes crashing down. Everything's falling apart. We watch Horus and his Mournival twist and turn and just change into some... We can see it. It's like watching a car crash in so slow motion. And then, you know, we go on to things like The Flight of the Eisenstein, Fulgrim, Descent of Angels, and then, you know, the quality is subjective from this point onwards. These first 6 are pretty solid, though. And suddenly, what started as a paragraph in Adeptus Titanicus in like 1988 blossoms into something new. Into a 60-book series covering all the legions, covering 24 war zones, the actions of all the Primarchs, the questions we've had are asked and answered. But there are rules. We know things. We know certain things happen. We know certain things have to happen. You know, we're sat there. We know that, you know, that the loyalists in the traitor legions have to be purged. So we look at characters like Rillanor and Sultarovitz. And even from day one, we're kind of a bit sad because we know what has to happen to them. Then we get things like The Flight of the Eisenstein, which again expands on a piece of existing lore. That there were loyalists in the traitor legions. Because that's in a piece of I think Rogue Trader it might even be in, or White Dwarf. It's a very old piece of lore about how I think it's 12 World Eater loyalists are the only ones that buy Garrow the time to escape. But Garrow's named. Garrow's been there since the beginning. And we get to expand on it. Garrow and the Knights Errant doesn't break anything, but it tells us more about what's going on. So, we have all these authors who are telling us nothing is true. Nothing is canon. And I'm supposed to respect them because they're the ones with their names on these books. But they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong. There is a subjective truth. Or an objective truth, not a subjective truth. My apologies. Horus is a traitor. Horus betrayed his brothers and his father and his sons, and he threw the galaxy into chaos. That is a fact. Horus destroyed worlds. His troops burnt Talon. They, ravaged Terra. That is true. There is no oh, it's a half-heard rumour. It's an unreliable narrator. I've read the book. I've seen it happen, effectively, with my own eyes. That is what reading the book is. Okay? There is... this unreliable narrator thing is cope. It's pure cope, so that they've always got an out. Because as Disney found out, canon's hard. You have to know it. You have to have someone who's passionate and has knowledge, because they have to look at something new and go, how does this fit into the world's most complicated spiderweb being watched by 20,000 autists constantly? This isn't just about the female Custodes. That's the straw that broke the camel's back. If we don't respect canon, then there's no reason why your Space Marine chapter has to be 1,000 Marines. There's no reason why your Space Marines can't be women. There's no reason why your Space Marines can't be orcs. There's no reason why your Space Marines have to be blue if they're Ultramarines. There's no reason why my Eldar, are dying. No, my Eldar are absolutely fine. My Eldar aren't being eaten by Slanesh. How? They're just not. That's my fluff. And we have a certain amount of freedom to make up our own background, sure. But good background for your army fits within the rules. For example, White Scars. We know White Scars like to go fast. We know White Scars like to emulate their Chagorian battle standard of lightning warfare and asymmetrical warfare. So it's not very fluffy to have a tank heavy or an artillery White Scars army. It is, however, canon, because it's mentioned in the books, that they have an artillery division. They don't like dreadnoughts, but they are mentioned in the canon. So we know, for example, honour is a really important part for the White Scars. Okay? We know that punishment is an important part of Chagorian culture. So sitting in the same rules, it's very easy that my Brotherhood of the Dead, which is mostly Terran, a very unpopular brotherhood, has a large number of dreadnoughts, and often receives censured Marines from other divisions, because the Khan doesn't like them. So they get sent there because it increases their chances of being put in a dreadnought, and they have to hang around with the dreadnoughts. Nothing there breaks the canon at all. Your Mark 6 wearing Iron Warriors on bikes don't break canon, because they could be a lightning fast strike force being used to intercept supplies that, are trying to be smuggled into a fortress that you're sieging. So we have our freedom as long as we play the rules. But we can't, come along and just go like, oh yeah, these are my traitor Death Guard at Terra. They worship Khorne. They don't worship Nurgle. That's why I painted them red as well, because that isn't within the rules. Because we know the entire Legion was betrayed and given to Nurgle, and when they made it to Terra, they were slimy. We know that our Marines in 40k should be around 1,000 Marines for a Codex compliant chapter. I see you, Black Templars. I see you. Sit down. We know that Imperial Guard regiments, for example, they can be mixed. We know that there are female-only regiments. We know there are male-only regiments. And we know there are mixed regiments. Because it's mentioned in the fluff in several spaces. So there is justification for you to build your army however you want. There is not an Imperial Guard regiment that's made up of orcs. There is not a Tau, possessed army that we know of. We don't have a singing and dancing troop of Necrons who have decided to worship Siagorath and help the Black Library, because that is 100% against their entire thing. The rules exist so that we can follow them in the setting. Otherwise, we might as well be playing a different game. We might as well be playing a different setting. My Space Marine Praetor has a laser sword and is surrounded by furry teddy bears who like to ambush other Space Marines. It's a bit weird. Doesn't quite work. Probably could actually work in some way, shape or form, actually. That kind of sucks. But we know that there are rules. We have these rules. So the community going, oh, I don't care about canon. And the writers saying, oh, canon doesn't exist. It does exist. It clearly exists. And one of the most important things about this is it justifies why we care. If you throw canon out, if you say canon doesn't matter, canon isn't important. I can't believe how many times I've said the word canon. It's lost all meaning. If you tell me these rules don't matter, I have zero incentive to continue buying books. You're going to tell me that the events of Talon, Angel Exterminatus, Galaxy in Flames never happened, and I should just oh yeah, that didn't happen, it was all a dream. I mean, how many times do we it was all a dream cop out? Does that not infuriate you as much as it infuriates me? And then the people nowadays who are just like, oh well, oh, don't want to break it to you, bro, but none of it's real. Yeah, we get that. We know there's no 8-foot tall super space racist, killing machines out there yet. But that's not what we believe. It didn't happen in the sense that it didn't happen in setting. Those people that... This is a bit of a tangent. People whose argument is to argue things like that, like, oh, it's not even real, or, aha, you made a spelling mistake, so I'm going to attack that now, or I'm going to attack ad hominem. Fuck me! Those people are insufferable. It's not real, it's just a game, bro. Oh, I just want you to choke on your own tongue. I buy these books because I want to continue the story. I want to know what happens next. Okay, Star Trek. Let's look at Star Trek. Each episode of the original series of Star Trek is a standalone story. don't need to watch all of the episodes. I can just drop in and watch anyone I want. Absolutely fine. And actually, this is good, because this also helps clarify a different point about like changing canon. In the original TOS Star Trek, they can travel really, really fast. They go up to like warp 15. They even have time warp at one point. But in the Next Generation in the 80s, we find out that you can't go faster than warp 9.9 recurring, because if you hit warp 10, you are occupying every single space in the universe all at once. It's beyond fast. But in the 60s, they've done warp 10. So they explain it. They explain. Then there's a new warp scale. Things got fast, so they shifted it and they changed it, so it became a new warp scale. Now, for, Trekkies who make Warhammer nerds look, dumb, there was a lot of science behind it. There's a lot of conversation for a long time over stuff like that. They care. If you just throw it out and just don't care, they'll get angry. They'll stop watching. You don't want that. You want people watching your show. So, I know that, if I shoot a person with my phaser on stun, the person goes down because they're stunned. If a person doesn't get stunned by my phaser on stun, why not? They better have a good reason. Which then makes, the point of like, hey, I've shot you with my phaser on stun and it hasn't stopped you. Why hasn't it stopped you? Becomes a story point. Oh, he's not human. He's actually a robot. Oh my god. Brilliant. Now we have Star Trek like Star Trek Discovery. And I have to watch every episode, because if I miss something, I don't know what's going on. So you got those two things, but they have the same thing. They have rules. Now, bad writing aside, where sometimes they forget the rules or they change their rules, which Discovery seems to have an awful lot more of. You had 3 series of Star Trek running at the same time. Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. All taking place in different places in the galaxy at different times-ish, but roughly at the same time in universe. Fun fact, the stardate they'll say something and then they'll say point, or the first number I think it is the series of TNG that it's taking place in. That's how you know what time it is. The star dates all line up somehow. I can't remember exactly, but that's how it is. It's something to do with the series of TNG it's in. Those 3, Deep Space Nine taking place in a space station, Voyager lost in space, TNG being, the standard Star Trek, all had the same rules. The ships had the same ranks. The uniforms were similar. We knew that red was command, yellow was engineering, blue was science. If we had Star Trek Voyager come on and the captain's wearing a blue uniform, because that's what the captain wears, why? That's wrong. That's not right. So we have the rules. I don't know how to end this video. I'm kind of just circling the drain at this point. I keep saying the same thing over and over again. We have rules in canon, in our fiction, in our media, for a reason. They let us get invested. If we do not obey these rules, we have consistency issues. And it becomes noticeable eventually. There is a famous quote from Tolkien. And it's one of the reasons he actually wrote The Hobbit. And I'm going to butcher the quote, but to paraphrase it, he is talking to his son Christopher. Because The Hobbit started as a story he made up to tell his son Christopher when he was a child, as a bedtime story. And he talks about Thorin Oakenshield and how his cloak was a certain colour with like a silver or gold tassel on the back of it. To which point Christopher Tolkien says, last night the tassel was silver or gold or whatever colour it was. And Tolkien himself went, shut your mouth, kid, stood up, and then went and actually started writing things down. And that's the whole reason he started writing it down, was to keep track of these things. That has led on to The Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion, I can never say that word, and all the other Tolkien books and stuff we have. And that is one of the biggest cultural phenomenons as well in fantasy. It may not have sold the numbers and impacted as many people as, say, Star Wars did, but it culturally had quite an impact. It built the fantasy genre as we know it. And it's all because of internal consistency in the world. So we know that, in their universe, certain rules apply. Would it have been as popular if, he hadn't written the languages and then used them? And, would people be learning Elvish if there were constant inconsistencies in the books? I don't think there would. Just like I don't think people would have learnt Klingon for Star Trek fans. Or how 40k fans have learnt that man is made in God's image, not aliens. So I think it's important to push back, even on bad actors like authors who are just, I'll be honest, the reason the authors are saying this is so they keep getting employed. Anyone who is getting paid to do something has no integrity. It's that simple. They will toe the party line to ensure that they are invited back to write another book. Especially people like, Gavin Thorpe and Dan Abnett. They need to continuously be employed. And you don't want to take a stand politically or anything else to piss off your employer. But that's what we need. Anyway, that's been nearly 3/4 of an hour of me rambling about canon. I'm sorry that you've had to listen to this. But I kind of wanted to tackle this because maybe it's because I'm autistic, I don't know. But these stories are important. And following this story as is, knowing that what I read in one book has the same weight as something I read in another book, that seeing the references, knowing that I can expand on that, I think it's important. It's certainly important to me. And I think it's important for the hobby in general. Because why would we want to go and watch a 40k TV show if it has nothing to do with the 40k we know? I don't want to go and watch an Amazon TV show. If The Witcher had machine guns and laser swords, it's not The Witcher anymore. So why would I go and watch the Witcher series if it's like that? Oh wait, people aren't watching The Witcher because it's not following the story or the canon. That's funny. So yeah. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? There's a lot of you guys out there. I know, I see you on Twitter. I can't stay on Twitter. I hate Twitter. It's awful. Please ban me off Twitter. Please feel free to pop a comment down below and let me know what you think. If you've watched this video all the way to the end, please, just tell me. Let me know you've done it, because otherwise, if no one says they've watched this thing all the way to the end, I'm never recording a video that's nearly 45 minutes long again. If you have stuck through it, thank you. I really do appreciate you. I've started work on a project for Patreon, which I hope you guys will like. Some of the guys on Discord have already started seeing it. I'm very happy with where it's at the moment, and hopefully we'll get that up and running soon. If you want to support the channel, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. And if you're shopping in the UK, check out Element Games. Use the reward code below in the description, and it doubles the reward points you get at checkout. and also gives me some points. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Bando. I have been your autistic guide through the world of novel history. Thanks very much. Have a great day. Bye bye.